years, the city of Coral Gables has been the inspiration for many pieces of art, from sculptures to paintings and even songs. But this is a first for the City Beautiful, in that it is now the inspiration for a video game. Joining me today is the creator and designer of A Golden Wake, Francisco Gonzalez. Francisco, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now first of all, tell me a little bit about A Golden Wake and what goes into it, and what's a little bit of the story.
Well, A Golden Wake is a point-and-click adventure game. It's kind of a throwback to the old point-and-click adventure games of the 90s. Basically, it's a story about a real estate agent named Alfie Banks who comes down to Coral Gables during the 1920s, during the land boom. And it's basically his journey, a rise and fall story, as he sort of gets involved in the whole real estate boom, and he basically is involved with the inception of Coral Gables.
See, I find it really interesting that the story is in Coral Gables. When you hear about the Roaring Twenties, you hear about the Northeast, New York, Chicago. Why city of Coral Gables?
Because exactly the reason you mentioned, you don't hear about it. And I mean, I was born and raised here. I mean, I've always lived close to Coral Gables. I've always found the history of Miami and Coral Gables especially really interesting. So I thought, why not tell the story?
Now, as I understand that it's not completely historical, but it is based on a lot of historical events and historical figures. Can you point out some of those people and some of those events that happened?
Right. Yeah, it's historical fiction. It's not strictly adhering to everything. But yeah, George Merrick obviously is a major character. Doc Dammers is in it as well. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, William Jennings Bryan. You go to a lot of historical locations like the Biltmore Hotel, the Coral Gables House, the Venetian Pool. There's what else? Yeah, that's basically it, I think. Well, you go to Flagler Street downtown.
So a lot of people who have been in the city of Coral Gables and live in the city of Coral Gables will see these landmarks and they'll know that this is based off of the City Beautiful.
Yeah. There's no mistake there. At least I hope.
Now, what I think that's really interesting about this is that now we're really into the next generation console. Whether that's the Xbox One or the PlayStation 4. We're very heavily into the next generation, the better graphics. But you decided to do a little throwback with the 8-bit look. What goes into that decision?
Well, practicality as well as just preference, I guess. I mean, it's just me doing it, so it's easier for me to just do that in that low-res style and not have to worry about, spending days on the background or an animation, for example. And mostly because I like those games and that genre, the adventure game, the story-focused game. Their heyday, like I said, was in the 90s, and it's sort of an homage to that sort of look. I mean, there's the genre is still around, and there's plenty of games that are now 3D and everything, but practically, it's easier to do the 2D low-res look, and people still like it, so.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, when I play video games, I'm all about the graphics and, the gameplay, but there's still something special about the throwback. I mean, my first video game console was a Super Nintendo.
Right,
so
yeah.
It looks kind of like that if you haven't seen it. We'll look at some of the trailer later on. Tell me more about Alfie Banks. I know he's your main guy in the story.
Yeah, Alfie Banks is a fictional character. He's a real estate agent. When I was first thinking about where I wanted the story to go, I was kind of toying with the idea of making George Merrick the main character. But then I thought that would probably be a little too much like an interactive textbook sort of thing.
Right.
So I thought it would be more interesting to have the history of Coral Gables happening in the background and then having just a completely blank slate fictional character to work against that. So Alfie Banks is basically like a young go-getting real estate agent who comes down and he has his rise and fall and sort of gets corrupted by the whole, real estate thing, ends up working for the mob. Things like that. So
right. So we talked about some of the historical figures and some of the landmarks that you might see in the game. Now, this is based off of some historical events. So
yes.
What are some of those events?
Well, the two big hurricanes of that era are in there. The hurricane of 1926 is a pretty big factor. The Labor Day hurricane of 1935 is also in there. Another figure I didn't mention was Fatty Walsh, who used to run a speakeasy up at the Biltmore Hotel. His time in the Biltmore and his sort of demise are depicted as well. Yeah, the air shows that they used to do for the Coral Gables project are in there too. Mabel Cody her flying circus, that's in there too. Yeah, there's some things that are mentioned in the background that aren't really depicted. There's a ship that sank in 1926 in the harbor that kind of heralded the end of the land boom, but that's kind of mentioned in passing. So there are some things that if you're really paying attention, you'll say, "Oh, look, that's historically
Right. I'm sure
accurate."
there's somebody out there who
Yeah,
knows
sure.
all about this and is going to be crazy about your game. Now, when does this game hit the market?
End of September is looking like. We don't have a specific date, but we've been saying end of September for a while now, and it's pretty much ready to go.
So you're thinking the PC release first, and you were mentioning earlier about
Yes.
Possible iOS release?
Yeah, it'll be initially released on PC at the end of September, and it'll be ported to iOS at some point. I don't know when, but at some point it will be.
Well, we're really looking forward to this game hitting the market. Of course, it is the first of its kind here in Coral Gables. Is there anything that you wanted to add about the game and maybe just talk about it a little bit more?
I just hope people enjoy it. I mean, I personally think it's a very interesting history. I'm sure, hopefully, people here in Coral Gables will appreciate the history as well. Because like I said, I've always been fascinated by it, and to have the opportunity to be able to tell that story has been really cool.
All right, thanks a lot, Francisco. Once
Thank you.
again, that was Francisco Gonzalez, the creator and designer of A Golden Wake, the first video game based off of the city Beautiful. That's going to do it for Coffee Talk. I'm Mike Biana. Thanks for watching Coral Gables Television.